Thanks, everybody. So here we go. So thanks for coming and happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Today, we're going to be learning a little bit about how we can use good nutrition to help take care of our hearts. So this presentation is somewhat interactive. I'll have you type some things in the chat box as we're going, but I will try to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. And I also just want to stay on at the end a little bit and answer any questions that anybody has about the new wellness portal, because I know that's been bringing up a lot of questions for some people. So we'll leave some time for questions at the end, and then I'll stay past 11 for questions about the portal. So jumping right in, today, we're going to do a little bit of a speed dating adventure in the spirit of Valentine's Day. So even if you're in a committed relationship, please join us for a speed dating adventure to get to know some of the nutrients that are major players for our hearts.
The green and then the start.
Looks like someone's unmuted. All right, so before we start any sort of dating adventure, it's important to get to know ourselves. You gotta love yourself before you can love anybody else. You gotta know yourself before you can know who you're looking for. So let's start off with a little personality quiz. So we will use our chat box to answer this question. So we're starting off really romantic here. What was the #1 leading cause of death in USA in 2020? Was it COVID, cancer, heart disease, or unintentional injury, which includes drug overdose, which we know is a lot. All right, we got some answers for C. Anybody else want to put in their guess for leading cause of death? All right. Yeah, the answer is C. It's heart disease. This is a presentation about heart disease. Of course, the answer is heart disease. A couple interesting facts about this, though. Heart disease last 2020 killed twice as many people as COVID-19, which is quite shocking. It causes 1 in 4 deaths, and it's been the leading cause of death for a very long time. So that's why it's important to talk about it today. All right, next question. How often is our healthcare system dealing with somebody having a heart attack somewhere in the United States? Is it every 4 seconds, every 40 seconds, every 40 minutes, or every 4 days? How often is somebody having a heart attack somewhere in the US? Every 4 seconds, we got one guess. Anyone else gonna guess? Got a B. All right. Yeah, the answer is B, every 40 seconds. That's a pretty significant drain on our healthcare system. This statistic is a little bit old, but in 2016, 2017, heart disease cost the United States $363 billion, which is a lot. And these heart attacks are, many of them, preventable by maintaining a healthy lifestyle. All right, so next question. When does heart disease occur? Does it happen if your Valentine doesn't love you back with lots of symptoms? Does it happen if you eat too many egg yolks? Does it happen when plaque builds up in the arteries and reduces blood flow to the heart, or all of the above? So Maura thinks it's when plaque builds up in the arteries. And Grace also votes D. All right. So I'm surprised that nobody said E, all of the above, but yes, the answer is D, when plaque builds up in the arteries. Let's go back and kind of myth bust a couple of these. A, if your Valentine doesn't love you back, yeah, that one actually probably is true. Oops. Lots of symptoms. Heart disease is known as the silent killer because often when you're suffering from heart disease, you don't feel any different. You can have all these problems happening in your arteries and have no idea that that's going on. For C, egg yolks. Great news, egg yolks are out of the doghouse, which is exciting. We can eat them freely now. They are no longer thought to be a major cause of heart disease. To what it means when plaque builds up in the blood vessels. So some of the major causes of heart disease are listed here. We're going to be focusing this presentation on the top 2, blood cholesterol and blood pressure, because those are the 2 that we can modify through nutrition. Smoking, obviously, we can modify in other ways. Genetics, we can't really modify very much. So we're going to focus on the top 2. First of all, let's talk a little bit about cholesterol. I really like this picture in here because it gives us a good idea of why one of these is lousy and why one of these is healthy. So HDL and LDL are our two main types of cholesterol. And you can remember LDL is the lousy one and HDL is the healthy one. This is a little picture of what's going on inside our blood vessels. So you can see the LDL guy is making a big mess, leaving deposits everywhere. And then HDL is the guy that has to go and clean those up and move them out of our arteries where they can be transported back to the liver and get processed and excreted. So you really want more of the cleanup guys and fewer of the make a mess guys to improve your overall cholesterol. So we see here the best way to lower your LDL is to raise your HDL, which you can do by exercising, managing stress, quitting smoking. But what we're going to be talking about today is eating more healthy fats. And you can lower your unhealthy cholesterol, your lousy one, by eating more fiber and less of the unhealthy types of fat. Blood pressure is the other one that takes a toll on our heart. If there's too much pressure moving through your veins and arteries, it can put a lot of pressure on your heart and make your heart have to work harder. So the main one that we'll be talking about today on how to improve your blood pressure is by reducing sodium intake. The reason for this is if you eat too much salt, having a lot of salt in your body, salt acts as a sponge and it soaks up water. So if you have extra salt in your body, you're going to have extra water in your body, and some of that water is going to be traveling through your arteries. If you have too much that's trying to get through that artery, it's going to be pushing on the sides and making your blood pressure go up. So you don't want to have too much fluid trying to move through there because that increases the pressure. And then if we think about the deposits on the last slide, if there are too many deposits lining this, it's going to make that passageway narrower, which is also going to increase the pressure. So we want to make sure that those arteries are nice and open and that there's not too much fluid that's trying to move through them. That's how you can improve your blood pressure. Now it's time to meet our three characters that will be speed dating. Sodium, fat, and fiber are the three. So I will call them all up to the front. Nutrients, please introduce yourselves. Tell us your name, any nicknames you like to go by. Let us know what your jobs and hobbies are, where you like to hang out on Saturday night, some of your favorite foods, and some of these real weirdos like to share their favorite number, which we know is totally awkward, but we'll just let them do that anyways. Up, we have salt. So salt's real name is sodium, but likes to be called salt, and salt is the life of the party. Everyone loves salt, but if you look at what salt is doing when nobody is watching, be careful and watch out for yourself around salt. Salt does have some really important jobs, and one of the most important jobs is enhancing flavor. So when we add salt to foods, we don't necessarily want our food to taste very salty. We want it to taste more like itself. So an experiment you can do in the summertime with a nice, fresh, ripe summer tomato, you can take one slice of tomato, have a bite of it. It's very good. Then if you put a little bit of salt on that slice of tomato, let it sit for about a minute to do its thing. Then if you take a bite, it will be a lot more tomatoey. It shouldn't really taste more salty, but it should taste more like itself. The other important job of salt is a preservative for shelf-stable foods. So historically, if you want something to last a long time, you pump it full of salt and then it doesn't go bad. Nowadays, our food science technology has moved past that, so you don't really need as much salt to keep foods from spoiling, but that still does hang on a little bit because we're kind of used to foods having salt as a preservative, but we don't really need it anymore. Some of salt's favorite hobbies are raising blood pressure across America, like we just talked about, and lighting up reward pathways in the brain. Salt is actually very important for many body processes, like the electrical impulses to keep your heart beating and your muscles moving. So we do need it, and when we were evolving, it was pretty rare in nature. So when we came across some salt, our reward pathways would light up and say, woo, you need this. So that doesn't serve us very well these days when salt is readily available, but that is why we tend to crave a lot of salt. All right, on Saturday night, where can we find salt? I was gonna see if I could zoom in on this a little bit. I don't know if anybody could see that. But salt is there. Down underneath cholesterol. So what you're looking for is the percent daily value a lot of the time. So if it's 5% or less, that means it's low. And if it's 20% or more, that means it's high. I cannot zoom in. I thought that I could, but it looks like on this, yeah, this won't let me zoom in. Sorry. That's all right. So that says 850, which is pretty high for this food. So let's look and see what some other numbers are for salt. We're going to have Salt talk about Salt's favorite foods, which is kind of awkward. Anybody want to guess how many milligrams for healthy people is recommended? You can type your guess into the chat box. Sorry about that. To throw one noisy kitten out. All right. 30 milligrams per day. So we're looking at milligrams for healthy people. How many recommended? So the answer is 2,300 milligrams per day. So that's about 2.3 grams of salt. Anybody want to guess how that number is different if you're dealing with high blood pressure or heart disease? You can just type your answer in the chat box. All right, so it's a little bit lower. It's about 1,500 to 2,000 if you have heart disease. 1,500 is pretty low. Most doctors will probably say around 2,000. So how does that compare to what's actually in table salt? So table salt has the same amount as is recommended for a healthy person. That's not to say you can take 1 teaspoon of salt and sprinkle it on your food throughout the day, because most of the salt we get in our diet is actually already in food. It's not really what we are adding to it. So the fun question is, how many milligrams does the average American consume of salt or of sodium per day? Do you think it's higher than the recommendation, at the recommendation? Grace thinks too many. Anyone else have a guess? More guesses higher. You're right. So the average American gets not quite twice as much as the recommendation, but a little bit over. Alrighty. So this is a much more interesting question than Salt's favorite numbers, but Salt's favorite foods. Where do we find a lot of salt in our diet? Most of the salt that we're getting is being added to foods before they actually make it to our table. So the problem is not really what we're sprinkling on at the table, although if you do get rid of your salt shaker, that will make a good difference. Some of these foods are the highest foods. And so I want everybody to take a minute and Google your favorite processed food, something that you think might be high in sodium. Hint, frozen pizza is a good one to look at. So just type in the food that you're interested in and nutrition facts label and see if you can find how much sodium is in it. Just open up another browser. And if anybody finds anything over like 900 milligrams, I would love for them to share. And while you're doing that, I'll let you know that even some of the foods that we think are really healthy tend to be really high in salt. One good example is those packaged rice or quinoa mixes, the ones that have a little foil flavor packet in them. Those foil flavor packets are really high. So you think, oh, brown rice in quinoa, pilaf, that sounds really healthy. But if you're going to add that little flavor packet in there, it's going to bring up a lot of salt. Does anybody do any Googling and find anything? I know we're moving kind of quickly. This is speed dating. So the one that I found when I was doing this was Progresso lentil soup, which had 730 milligrams for 1 serving, which is like half the can, which is a lot for just like this much soup. All right, feel free to report back as we move on. All right, so this is a good slide if you are thinking of some ways that you want your food to taste exciting and not bland. You can take a screenshot of this slide if you're interested in referring back to this later. The one that I will point out is the acid section. So if you're cooking a dish or a soup and you're getting to the end and you're tasting and you're saying, I need something, it's good, but it needs something, what does it need? Try adding either lemon juice or vinegar at that point, because that can really help to pop and brighten the flavors in the way salt does. A lot of times that final taste we think, oh, it needs more salt, but it actually might just need a little bit of acid. That's one good trick there. Okay, thank you, Salt, very much for coming up and sharing. So just a major takeaway is anything you make yourself is probably going to be lower in sodium than anything you buy packaged or at a restaurant. Even if you add a little bit of salt when you're cooking, it's not going to be that high as it would be if you bought something processed. Don't forget to read the nutrition labels, especially for things that say low sodium. A good example is soy sauce. Regular soy sauce has 1,000 milligrams in 1 tablespoon, and low sodium soy sauce has 600 milligrams. So that's not a huge difference between 1,000 and 600. They're still both really high, although one is technically lower. That's a good example to just remember to read your labels when you're picking things, even if they say healthy choice. Just read it and make sure that it's actually a healthy choice. All right, our next nutrient that we have to talk about is fat, and it actually looks like we have 2 fat siblings here today. We're going to meet both unsaturated fat and saturated fat. So both of them have the same job, which is to increase satiety and satisfaction. If you eat a salad with either fat-free or no salad dressing on it, you might not feel as satisfied as you would if you had a salad dressing with some olive oil and nuts and avocado, because that fat's what's going to help you feel full, like you've had a meal, and send those signals to your brain, oh, I've eaten. The other really important thing that fat does is it serves as a hormone producer in our body. So some of the important hormones are the neurotransmitters that regulate our mood. So if we don't eat enough fat, we're actually at a much higher risk of anxiety and depression, because the hormones and the neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin all come from fats. So if you don't eat enough fat, you're really missing out on some important nutrients. Also helps us to absorb certain vitamins and carry things around the body. It's an important source of energy. So we don't want to totally be getting rid of fat. So both fats you can find close to the top of the label. You'll see a bold total fat at the top, and then all the subcategories of fat under that. All the subcategories will total up to the total fat. So even if it only lists saturated fat, you can do some subtracting and figure out how much of that remaining fat is saturated versus unsaturated. The other thing you might see on a label is trans fat, but the FDA outlawed trans fat in June of 2018. So it should always say trans fat 0, because trans fat is so unhealthy that they actually made it illegal to put it in foods. So if you see any food that says trans fat 2 grams, check the expiration date, because it's probably about 4 years old. All right, so saturated fat, we can call that one the less healthy fat. I'm not calling it the unhealthy fat, because we just learned that the unhealthy one is trans fat. So saturated fat is less healthy because it does increase your LDL. So some of the places that you can find saturated fat are mostly animal sources. You can see the one exception, the plant source, is coconut oil. You can tell that it's a saturated fat because it's solid at room temperature. So like coconut oil or butter is going to be solid at room temperature. Another good example is bacon grease. If you cook bacon and then pour off the grease, once that grease cools, it's going to be solid, and that's how you know that that's a saturated fat. All right, so our other counterpart is unsaturated fat, which is definitely the healthy fat. This is the one you want to be focusing on, especially to support our mood and our energy, because that's the one that will help increase your HDL, which will lower your LDL, the lousy one, the make a mess guy. So this is kind of the opposite of the other one. You'll see it's mostly found in plant sources, with the one exception in animal sources is fish, and unsaturated fat is liquid at room temperature like olive oil, as opposed to butter, which is solid. That's a good clue. Obviously, things like avocados, nuts, and seeds are solid, but if you were to pull all the oil out of those, that is liquid at room temperature. Some of these other liquid oils, like canola oil and safflower oil, are technically unsaturated fat. The jury's still kind of out on how healthy those are. We really want to be focusing mostly on the olive oil and the avocado, nuts, and seeds until the research is more solid. All right, so thank you, Fat. That was very nice. So major takeaways: choosing the right amount of fat is a lot more important than reducing overall fat, which is a new way of thinking when we're talking about heart disease. Traditionally, they were telling us, reduce your fat, reduce your risk. But now we're knowing if you reduce your fat too far, then you're missing out on a really important nutrient. Does anybody remember the 1990s and Snackwell cookies, when we wanted to take all the fat out of everything? Who here was eating Snackwells in the 90s? All right, so our last character that we're meeting is fiber. So fiber is kind of showing off here. Fiber has a really impressive resume. Have you ever seen that diagram where it says career, vocation, job, hobbies, and where you meet in the middle is where you find your passion? Fiber has really found the passion and has figured it all out. So some of the things that fiber does for us is reduce our lousy cholesterol, so the make a mess guys, by sticking to that lousy cholesterol in our digestive system and carrying it through so that it gets excreted in your stool instead of absorbed by your blood. It also can help improve bowel function. These aren't quite so related to heart disease, but I think they're really important, and I think that fiber is a magical nutrient. So just to go through them, it makes you regular, which helps prevent diverticulitis, which can help prevent certain types of cancer. It also helps to stabilize our blood sugar, which can help regulate your appetite and regulate your weight. Basically, fiber's out there protecting innocent people and fighting for good in the world like some superhero. Okay, so fiber is found under carbohydrates. Sorry, again, this is so small, but it's listed as a subcategory of carbohydrates because fiber is a carbohydrate. It's just one that cannot be digested. So if you're really careful about counting carbs, you can actually subtract those fiber grams from the total carbohydrates because those are the ones that you're not going to digest or absorb. They just pass straight through, soaking up stuff on their way out. All right, so fiber's got some embarrassing nicknames. Lots of people like to call it roughage or bulk, but fiber can't seem to shake those embarrassing childhood nicknames. All right, we got another nerd who's sharing favorite numbers. Anybody want to guess how many grams are recommended for women and for men per day? We can say a good source of something is about 3 grams per serving. So how many total grams do we want to be aiming for in a day? Any guesses? Any guesses? We don't have tons of chatty people in this. All right, fine, I'll tell you. For men, we want to be seeing 38. Oh, Moore is guessing 50. That would be nice. For women, the recommendation is 25. Look at that, patriarchy right there. All right, so now that we have our idea of how much we should be aiming for, anybody have a guess for how much we actually get in a day, the average American? Do you think we're meeting our fiber needs? Moore is a good guesser. Yeah, 10 to 15 is how much most people get. Pathetic. After all we know that fiber can do for us, most of us are not getting enough. So where can we get our fiber from? A lot of these foods people often tend to avoid because they're high in carbohydrates, but these are exactly the type of carbohydrates that we want to be eating more of. So beans, vegetables, whole grains, fruits, all these things are going to be a great source of fiber. And getting a good variety of all these things is a way to make sure that you're meeting all your needs. So whole grains, how do we know what a whole grain is? All right, there's our grain. So this is how it grows in the field on these little seeds. When you peel off one of those seeds, it kind of looks a little bit like an egg. It's got 3 parts. The bran that goes all the way around it is a great source of vitamins, minerals, and tons of fiber. The germ, like your little egg yolk there, is another good source of healthy fats, vitamins, and again, fiber. And then this middle part here, the endosperm, is mostly just carbohydrates and a little bit of proteins. So when we're looking at something that's whole grain, a lot of the foods that we're familiar with either come in a whole grain or a not whole grain. And a good example is rice. So white rice and brown rice are actually the same plant. Just for the white rice, they peel off the bran and the germ, and you're left with just the endosperm, while the brown rice has the whole grain left. So why would they peel off all those healthy bits and throw them out? I don't know. Same thing for white flour. If you see something that's whole wheat flour, it means that they've ground up this whole entire grain, all 3 parts. If they peel off the bran and the germ and throw it out and grind up just the endosperm, that's where you get white flour from. So a lot of times you might see like an oat bran muffin or wheat germ in a bag. That's these extra parts that they've peeled off. So if you buy those things, they are very healthy. but it's really great to be eating the whole entire grain all at once. So how do you know if you're eating the whole grain? Well, one thing that you can look on is the nutrition facts, the ingredients label. If the first word says whole, that says whole wheat, whole corn, whole rye, whole oat, you know it's the whole grain. If it just says wheat flour, yeah, we know that wheat flour is made out of wheat. They just peel off the bran and the endosperm, and that's what makes it white. Sorry, they peel off the bran and the germ and leave you the endosperm. That's what makes it white. You can also look for this little whole grain stamp to let you know that something's a good source of whole grains. Alrighty, so thank you, Fiber. Show off, but golden child. Okay, so now I've got our major takeaways. We'll invite our 3 new friends back to the stage for a final bow. And Salt is not exactly a heart health hero, but we will let Salt up here anyways. We want to be eating more of the healthy fats, more of the fiber, and less of the unhealthy fats and salt. So swapping out some of those things for their more nutritious options is a great way to raise our HDL, the cleanup guys, to lower our LDL, the make a mess guys, and improve blood pressure to not put quite so much strain on our heart. More asking about cracked grain. That's a good question. So cracked grain is going to have usually all 3 parts, but it'll just be cracked. So they'll take that bran and kind of basically slice through it.
Okay.
Cracked grain. But I believe those are whole grains too. Good question. Anybody else have any more questions? All right, cool. So if you'd like to get credit for attending this, you can go to the portal and log this under Attend a Live Well event, put in today's date and Heart Healthy Nutrition presentation, and you can get 20 points for attending this today. I can stay on for a couple more minutes and answer any questions anybody has about the portal, but thank you all so much for coming. Happy Valentine's Day and happy Heart Health Month.
Hey, Hope.
Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that I didn't have a chat box. That's why I didn't.
What?
Yeah, I'm listening, but I've like spent the meeting trying to find a chat box. So.
That's so interesting. I was wondering why nobody was guessing because I thought guessing things were really fun.
Yeah, it was fun, but
That's good feedback. Thanks for letting me know.
yeah, so I wanted you to know I appreciate it and I enjoyed it, but I couldn't communicate.
Oh my gosh.